Abdu, if God does exist, what are some of those implications for humankind as a whole? We have a question that's come in here. Someone's asking, why is the existence of God necessary for the intrinsic essential value of the individual?
Yeah, that's a great question because we can often think, if you're an atheist, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Hindu, whatever it happens to be, like I have people in my life that I value, and therefore they have value. But this question actually speaks a little bit more deeply to the idea of necessary, intrinsic, essential value of the individual. What that means is that every human being would have essential value objectively, even if no human beings in the world valued that person. In other words, what I'm getting at is that if for you and I to have an objective essential value, our value can't be based on the opinions of other people. Because if they are based on the opinions of other people, then it isn't essential, nor is it objective. It's just incidental. And so the Bible describes you and me as beings made in God's image, that we have an objective, essential value, that we are inherently sacred, not incidentally sacred. Because if we're incidentally sacred, then the horrors of the past, whether it's the sexism that kept women from being able to vote in this country, whether it's the racism that enslaved people and made them property in this country and in other countries as well, whether it's the infanticide of centuries past and not so distant past as well, or the sex trafficking industry now, or the pornography we're seeing where we objectify people, where we humanize our phones by calling them names that we use to objectify humans, by looking at pornography images for our base desires, then we become incidentally sacred or actually just tools of another person's pleasure. Because if human opinion is the basis for value, we are terrible at this. Historically, terrible. I would even say contemporaneously, we're showing ourselves to be terrible at this. All you need to do, and this is not a judgment against people necessarily in times of panic, but one thing that the coronavirus epidemic has shown us is that we really are terrible at valuing each other. My example is that you go to a grocery store and you see the shelves completely cleaned out. Now, is it the case that people are buying reams and reams and reams of paper products, or bottles and bottles and bottles of water, or cans and cans of non-perishable food so they can give it away? Or is it because they're terrified that they will run out? Now, I understand that terror. I get it. I totally get it. But why is that your first instinct? Because there's something in us that needs fixing. There's just something in us that needs fixing, and we all know it. And I'm not judging a person who does that any more harshly than I would judge myself as someone whose first instinct is to go do that. But I'm learning from someone else, the transcendent source of all human value, who tells me I ought to love my neighbor as myself because my neighbor is no less than me. Not because my neighbor thinks so, or because my wife thinks so, or because the government tells me so, but because God, who is the source of all being, he tells me that those he creates have his stamp of value on them. So I think it's necessary because if there is no God, then human value is a matter of human opinion. And history shows us human opinion is a terrible, terrible barometer for your and my value. You don't want human beings to be the judge of your value. Believe me, you don't want that. But God can be. Now, what does it mean for him to judge, to be the basis of your value? It isn't just God in general. I don't think it's just that God exists, therefore you have value. I don't think that works, because other systems of belief believe in a God, sometimes many gods, sometimes a God or a system of belief that believes that all of us are God, or there's only one God. But Christian theism, specifically, isn't just the idea that God exists, therefore you have value. It's that God exists and proves that you have value. So a friend of mine and I were sitting over dinner, and we hadn't seen each other in a long time, and we were catching up over various things, and it was a really nice dinner, and he took me out, and he said if he would pay for it, and I said, great, if you pay, then I'll pray, and we'll have a nice time. But he was an agnostic. Actually, really quite the atheist, but he called himself an agnostic. I think he wanted to seem at least objective on the issue. And he asked me about my faith journey, how I became a Christian. So I told him, and we centered on the problem of evil, which you described and answered so well earlier, Vince. And there's a lot of different answers to this problem of evil, and one of which, of course, is that we can't know whether or not God would allow suffering to exist in our lives for a greater possible purpose, because the God who knows all past, present, future, and future possible things could know the entire spiderweb of future history and know that though he allows but not creates certain suffering in our lives, that might exist for a greater purpose we're not even close to being able to understand. And he said, okay, I agree with that. But his question was this now. And by this time, the waitstaff had gone home, or they wanted to go home. All the patrons had certainly gone home, and they stopped serving us coffee so that we would just shut up. But he looked up from his cold coffee, and he says, here's what I really want to know. How do I know that this God you're talking about values me or my mother when she died when I was 10? It's not a philosophical question anymore, is it?
Yeah.
What do you answer in that particular moment? God exists, therefore you have value. Yes, you can do that. And can you give it syllogistically? Can you give it philosophically? Yes, you can do that. And we did some of that before that. But now it's not just true that he's looking for, it's relevant that he's looking for. There are plenty of things in life that are true and irrelevant. They're nice ideas that don't impact you. But he needed an answer that was both true and relevant. And he was 10 years old when his mother died, and he was 38 years old when he asked me that question. And from the passion and the pathos in the way he asked the question, I could tell 28 years of atheism hadn't answered his question about whether he or his mother had value. Did his mother mean anything? You know, Dawkins would say, he says, if the universe were just selfless genes and electrons, meaningless tragedies and meaningless good fortune are what we should expect to happen. The universe is blind, pitiless, and indifferent. If there's no God, he's not wrong. Lawrence Krauss says that when you add us all up, essentially, we're just cosmic pollution. We're irrelevant, he says. If there's no God, he's not wrong. My friend's question was, can you say that my mother had value? How do you know anything has value? How do you know? Someone tells you? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. You know how much value something has by what someone else is willing to pay for it. And you and I can all know that we have an objective, intrinsic, essential, non-communicable value, inalienable value, because the one who created the entire universe, the being who is necessary, through whom all other things come, paid an infinite price on a cross to spend an immeasurable eternity with you and with me. If you know how valuable something is by what you're willing to pay for it, you and I can know we have an objective, infinite value because an objectively infinite price was paid for you and for me. Not only is God necessary for you and me to have intrinsic and inestimable value, but God proves it, not just by his existence, but by his actions.
Thank you, Abdu. If you'd like to hear more from Abdu on this subject, then check out his latest book, Saving Truth, Finding Clarity in a Culture of Confusion. And also look ahead to his forthcoming co-authored book with Ravi Zacharias on Seeing Jesus from the East.